Hello, welcome to Frequencies. Tuning in to frequencies of human behavior, perspective, and empathy. How are you doing lately? Or how is your wallet holding up? Because if you've been in the grocery store recently, you probably know what I'm talking about. Those receipts are downright jaw-dropping. Feels like you can't really leave the house. You can't run a single errand without dropping $100, 100 bones. And it's pretty frustrating, isn't it? What's even more frustrating is when we ask our leaders why this is happening, we get a wall of jargon and graphs, and that one magic word, inflation. Word makes my fucking blood boil. Sure, when we talk about long periods of time, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, 100 years, yeah, inflation makes sense, absolutely. Economic systems evolve, industries shift, money changes value. Yeah, I get it. I'll take it. But when we're talking about prices that doubled or tripled in just 2, 3, maybe 6 years, that's not just inflation. That's deflection. It's a convenient word that hides a complex reality. And the truth is, this didn't happen slowly. This happened fast. And even though there isn't one evil villain pressing a big red inflation button, there is a pattern we could point to. And I think the reason traces back to one major factor: labor cost. Not the white-collar kind that can shift, relocate, or automate, although that's coming soon, I'm sure of it. I'm talking about the essential, low-end, frontline labor, the people who keep everything moving. For years, capitalism devalued that type of work in the name of efficiency and profit, stacking up administrative layers to make the actual service work cheaper and faster. We've talked about this multiple times, specifically in an episode called Formula for Success. But when those frontline workers demanded, and rightfully so, better pay and working conditions, the entire cost structure shifted upward. So what happens when every essential service, transportation, food production, logistics, what happens when companies have to pay more for the people who make all of that happen? Well, I think prices rise everywhere, very quickly too. And that's exactly what we've seen. This is a complex story. It's layered and it's recent. And it really centers around one moment in modern history we can all remember. 2020, the pandemic. Everything changed that year. And what followed has reshaped what things cost, for good, apparently. Today we're going to talk about how those events and the chain reaction that followed transformed our economy, our spending, and our expectations. We'll untangle what really happened behind the curtain of what everybody keeps calling inflation. This is Frequencies. This is episode 7. Let's tune in. So in 2020, everything changed. The world came to a standstill because of COVID-19, and every one of us had to adjust. In some way, shape, or form, humanity adapted. We adapted to distance, isolation, and this new idea of safety. I'm not here to debate the legitimacy of the virus or how the government handled it. It happened. It was devastating. Many people lost their lives. What I want to focus on is how, in the aftermath, the economic ground beneath us shifted, especially when it comes to prices. Grocery bills, retail costs, everyday essentials, they shot up. And years later, those costs haven't fallen back down. We're still dealing with them. And when we ask why everything still costs so much, we're met with the same vague answer. Well, inflation has a lot to do with it. Fucking bullshit. What does that even mean? To me, it feels like a Trojan horse, something our leaders roll out to distract us, to blanket a much more uncomfortable truth. Because I don't think the rising costs happened for a silly reason. In some ways, I think it happened for a reason that, in some ways, we've all quietly benefited from, and that's cheap labor. The world we've built thrives on little conveniences that make our lives easier, faster, cheaper. But all those comforts come at a cost. Behind every $5 burger is someone making minimum wage on a grill. Behind every waterproof jacket is a line of factory workers paid pennies for their stitching. Behind every can of pancake mix is a team of people moving ingredients, loading pallets and driving trucks. Each one earning the bare minimum to keep that product affordable for us. And here's the thing, acknowledging that truth would force our leaders to admit that back in 2019 and all the years leading up to it, a huge portion of our workforce wasn't being fairly paid. The system relied on keeping those wages low to make life comfortable for everyone else. So when the cost of low-end labor finally rose a little bit, when people demanded better pay and safer conditions and more stability, that ripple bled through every supply chain and every price tag we now see. I know this is a heavy topic, and it's tough to stay perfectly focused because everything connects, but it's important to break it down piece by piece and really explain how that shift in labor value directly links to the massive receipts we all see today. So let's unpack that. Back in 2006, I started my career in a pretty unique industry, one that overlapped with just about every industry out there in some way, shape, or form. It was in the B2B environment, and B2B means business to business for anybody that doesn't know. In the company that I worked for, the bread and butter of our business was experiential marketing for major brands. But we worked for a ton of different companies doing a ton of different services and needing the services of many other companies. We worked for marketing agencies, manufacturers, construction contractors, corporate teams, creating everything from fleet vehicle graphics and retail signage to large-scale mobile marketing vehicles that toured the nation, and full-blown, trade show spectacles with custom lighting, tech, and design features. I mean, you name it, we were working on it and needed 4 companies that did a variety of services. We worked with a lot of different companies. And over time, I worked my way up from a lower level installer position to the manager of that department, and then eventually into a project manager role. And all of these roles gave me a front row seat to different areas of different companies. The manager role, the project manager role really gave me a front row seat to the inner workings of just countless companies, big and small. I saw how decisions were made, what the priorities really were, and how every layer of the operation depended on the people doing the actual hands-on work. And through that lens, I witnessed patterns. 17 years total, all the way through 2022. And that gave me a clear view of how things looked before and after 2020. Working on site, I met all kinds of people, and I listened. I listened a lot. On job sites, conversations happen, sometimes just to break the awkward silence, and people open up. I talk a lot sometimes, unless I'm super busy, unless I'm super stimulated. But I talk. And I know how to poke and prod to talk in the directions that kind of make me curious. So Over the years, I collected what I call real world data, straight from the front line. The frustrations, the rants, the pride, the exhaustion. I wasn't just hearing complaints. I was paying attention to the patterns behind them. Then 2020 hit, and those patterns shifted dramatically. Early in the pandemic, office workers got what was, at the time, a massive perk working from home. It was necessary for safety, but the side effect was really unprecedented. It changed the employee-employer dynamic almost overnight. And you combine this with the nearly limitless amount of sick time employees could use, some of which was paid. Suddenly, workers had something they had never really had before: leverage. Now, how does that happen? Well, for one, the boundaries around sick leave disappeared. If you even thought you had COVID, you stayed home. No questions asked. And, companies leaned on stimulus relief and emergency funds to keep operations afloat. And I've read in a variety of places that stimulus relief, those government handouts that were given to, as employees, we were all given small checks. But companies also got massive stimulus incentives to kind of compensate for that sick time. But I've read a lot of places that could be potentially why we're in the hole we're in, and I don't agree with it. I don't think that's it at all. But that flexibility empowered people. Whether you worked in the office or on the front lines, the message was clear: if you're sick, don't come in. That kind of leeway had never really existed across the board before. And yes, people took advantage of it, for sure. Sometimes justifiably, sometimes not. Verifying every sick claim or family exposure was impossible, and employers knew it. But there was more happening beneath the surface. The sudden push for separation, the 6 feet apart world, it accelerated entire new industries overnight. Delivery services, curbside pickup, home-based services, online everything, just virtual this, virtual that. Jobs appeared everywhere, and they were roles that were easier, safer, or simply less stressful than the ones people already had. And many of those new positions, many of them paid just as much, if not more, than the traditional service or manufacturing jobs. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't people leave those high-stress jobs to go sit at a desk or even work from home and take calls? Or, the virtual world, that world was blowing up. It was massive. It was everywhere. And that's a ton of new, easier jobs. That's real leverage. And it gave people options they'd never really had before. And when somebody stuck at a low-paying or grueling job suddenly had the chance to make the same money doing less, they moved on. It created a massive retention problem across every industry I was interacting with, for sure. From the trades to the tech world, marketing, everywhere. Retention issues across the board. And on top of that, many older workers, worn out or financially stable from stimulus programs and savings, they took the pandemic as their cue to retire early. Meanwhile, the younger workforce coming in behind them wasn't really filling those roles at the same rate or with the same expectations. Retention became the new crisis, and that ripple, the one that started with leverage, ended up reshaping the entire labor market, totally leaving a wake of rising costs we still see today. I recall all this because I was in it. Even in my production manager role, I was involved on site with my guys, with our contractors. So walking across our production floor and really through every shop or office I visited, the scene looked the same everywhere. New faces, constant turnover. Every week, someone gone, someone new. Someone gone, someone new. The rotation of inexperienced workers was exhausting. And the people who really knew how things worked, the older guys, the old timers, they were fed up. Most of them were boomers who'd ridden out decades of steady work, built up home equity and seen the good years. They didn't need to grind it out anymore. They had already bought, sold, 3, 4, 5, 10 houses at manageable costs, that, you know, they were affordable costs that were balanced in the times of what incomes were. And at that point, you know, they develop equity. A lot of them owned their homes, but then COVID hit, and suddenly their jobs got tangled up in red tape, endless approval processes and digital paperwork from off-site coworkers still working from home. These were people who had mastered their craft or found every loophole that could be found to make it appear that way. And now they were being micromanaged by inboxes. They looked around and saw friends passing away and said, you know what? I'm done with this shit. So they retired early. Not just at my company either. I saw this everywhere. And that mass exodus opened opportunities, sure, but it also left gaping holes. Decades of knowledge gone overnight. All the undocumented workarounds, those quiet little, you know, this is really how we do it. You know, that little stuff. Methods that really kept things running disappeared with them. And when younger workers came in, they hit walls. New supervisors, tighter rules, layers of bureaucracy, you know, new managers that are flexing their muscles because they just got the position of this guy that just retired, and they're, you know, you can't do that. That type of stuff. You know, tasks that once flowed smoothly now crawled under the weight of new systems. And frustration built fast. Then came another shock: visibility. With new hires entering, the pay gaps between generations became painfully obvious. The older crew had mortgages locked in at 1990s prices and solid pensions and their 401ks. And the younger ones faced sky-high rents, inflated home costs, and zero stability. Private investors were buying homes out from under first-time buyers, flipping or renting them at insane prices. And I knew so many people that were trying to buy homes around this time, and it was insane. That all of the stories were the same. I mean, they would speak of open houses looking like rock concerts, homes being sold for $5, $10, $20, $30, $50, $100,000 over asking price with ridiculous requests like no inspection. I mean, it was insane what people were buying these houses for, most of them being private equity. So while the boomers are stepping away comfortably, owning a home, you got younger workers trying to survive on starting wages that can't afford, that can't keep up, that with math that just doesn't add up, which is still a major problem, and maybe the main problem. But back to the shop floor. You know, trades were drowning. The experienced workforce was retiring, and the replacement pipeline was thin, and the competing job markets were booming. Remote work, delivery services, tech support jobs, all jobs paying just as much for less effort. So when new workers did show up, they came in expecting simplicity, you know, run the machine, weld your part, move your pallets, clock out. But the work wasn't that straightforward anymore. Supply chain delays, staffing shortages, endless safety paperwork, and constant call-outs from COVID quarantines made everything harder. You know, the frustration cycle kept spinning, and people left constantly. The turnover rate was staggering. I did a little bit of digging on some numbers, and they're pretty dramatic for sure. You know, with 22 being, it was even called the year of the Great Resignation, remember? The only way companies could fight back was clear: raise the wages across the board, especially at the entry level. Those positions that powered the front lines of every operation, you know, the cheap labor that made everything else possible, they're vacant now. They were vacant. Nobody wanted to do them when easier, comparable paying jobs were everywhere else. So wages went up, first for the entry-level hires, then everyone above them. But that, ironically, caused even more chaos. The workers that had been loyal for years, you know, 5, 10 years, grinding their way up to $25, $30 an hour, $35, $40 an hour, suddenly saw brand new hires making the same amount of money on day one. And that didn't sit well, for sure. And I'm speaking to kind of manufacturing jobs in the Midwest. I know labor costs are different everywhere, But, these kids would come in making $25, $30 an hour almost day one. So these other guys that had been there 5 to 10 years, they quit. They worked their ass off to get to that. And now there's these younger guys coming in making almost just as much as them. If they didn't quit, they'd demand a raise or some type of title, but just enough to feel valued to stay. Either way, labor costs surged across every department. I remember actually overhearing somebody I knew across the shop floor. It was like, man, $25 an hour is the new $20 an hour. And they were right, and he was talking about some of the newer guys that were coming in. Apparently everybody's making $25 an hour when just a year before, $20 an hour was, $18, $19, $20 an hour was really the entry-level pay. It was all $25 an hour coming in. And that wasn't just at my company, but at companies we worked with and for. Manufacturing, construction, logistics, service, they were all facing the same math problem. Now, some businesses dealt with the problem with wage increases, but there was something else happening at this time that would have potentially allowed some major corporations to continue with the low wages. And if you remember, this is in the time frame of when our borders were wide open, apparently. I, myself, like so many others, am saying that because that is the picture that was painted constantly by our president, heavily on the campaign trail, and obviously still to this day. He says it constantly. Our borders were left wide open. People were walking right over. Now, I'm not 100% sure how true this is, but for the sake of the topic we're discussing, let's say it was indeed wide open. The borders were wide open. Our previous president's immigration policy regarding border security was extremely lax. Let's just say that. I'm pretty sure it can be confirmed there was a higher than usual number of immigrants coming across our border from the south. Well, what if that was intentional? Specifically for the reason of having notoriously known migrants that have no problem being paid low wages migrate into the U.S. to fill the roles of the burger flipper. Those low-paying jobs needed to be filled. I can speak to the observations I was making, and I can confirm that there were noticeably more Spanish-speaking workers working the intercoms at nearly all of my fast food drive-thrus. And before I go any further, I want to be crystal clear when I say I have no problem with any human being trying to find a way to provide for their family in any kind of service providing role. Now, how they got into the country, I have no idea. I would hope it was in some legal form, but if it wasn't, I would hope that they are trying to go through the process in some way, because some of you may or may not know, things are pretty bad in some spots of Mexico, really bad. Desperate people will do anything to provide for their family. And desperate, hardworking people that desire a low cost of living are great potential assets to monster corporations that need cheap labor. Are they not? All I'm saying is this. What if the leaders of our country fully took advantage of another country's desperate people? Because lower class in America is probably a massive upgrade to their lifestyle compared to the impoverished areas of some countries. And what that has turned into currently with ICE at this point is extremely sad and terrifying. Was it orchestrated? I don't know. But it's something to consider for sure. To me, it's pretty simple. When almost every frontline worker and production employee gets a significant wage increase all at once, somebody has to pay for it. And if you think the shareholders are going to take that hit, bless your little heart. You know they're not. We learned that way back in episode 2, courtesy of the Dodge brothers, that corporations exist to protect one thing above all else: shareholder profit. So when those labor costs rise across the board, do you think that money comes out of the profit margins? Out of the next yacht fund? Yeah, right. Those increases get passed down straight to the consumer. Then they feed us the classic line, oh, it's because of supply chain issues. Bullshit. Are we really still running with that one? Come on. Yeah, supply chains were a mess for a while, But those problems were really just the byproduct of the same labor issues we've been talking about. Forklift drivers, truckers, order pickers, they were leaving for easier, better paying jobs. Companies scrambled to fill gaps while half their workforce was out sick or quarantining. It wasn't some mysterious, invisible crisis. It was a retention issue dressed up in an economics lesson. But instead of fixing the core problem, corporations did exactly what corporations do. They raised prices, slapped the inflation sticker on it, and called it a day. And we, the consumers, just nodded along. Because when you see a chart with 1,000 arrows on it and a dude saying big words on it, it feels like science. It's inflation. It sucks, dude. No. Meanwhile, the entire system depends on having a cheap labor force to keep those profit margins fat. Every business model needs its grunt workers, even as many of them are being replaced by new administrative efficiencies, which usually means hiring a consultant who says, you could do this with fewer people, you know. The corporate ladder has turned into a revolving door. One manager leaves and another one comes in, and every new face at the top arrives with the same mission: cut costs, boost profits, hit next year's targets. Miss those targets and you're out. The worship of growth has gone from a mindset to a fucking religion. Now, I'm not saying every executive is a cartoon villain twirling his mustache while lighting cigars with your grocery bill. I'm not saying that. There are a few outliers. For instance, Dan Price, you may have heard about him, the former CEO of Gravity Payments. He famously slashed his own $1 million salary down to around $70,000 a year so he could raise his employees' minimum pay to the same number. Sounds like a decent dude, right? Then there's Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia. He literally gave away his companies so its profits could help fight climate change. Guys like that exist. They're just rare enough to be news headlines. But for the other 99%, the story's the same. They want more. Always more. New buildings, higher margins, faster turnarounds, and now they found a shiny new way to squeeze those extra pennies. Automation and AI. Yeah, they can only streamline the hands-on work so much. So now they're trimming the middle. Entire departments, marketing, accounting, HR, they're all being optimized by machine learning. That fat being cut, those are real people replaced by algorithms with fewer lunch breaks. So while prices climb and the narrative still points at inflation like it's some unexplainable natural disaster, the truth is right there in front of us. The cost of preserving perpetual growth always rolls downhill. And guess who's standing at the bottom? That's right. All of us. Wallets wide open. So now we've got AI and automation, right? This is the new technique. Squeeze the labor costs out of the office because that's what these type of people do. It's always about me, myself, and I. Who can climb the ladder the fastest? Who can buy the fastest car, the fanciest yacht, or the biggest island? Now, I don't want to dive too deep into the AI rabbit hole because that's a whole episode on its own for sure, but it ties in here. Artificial intelligence isn't causing inflation, it's a product of it. With rising labor costs, these corporate number jugglers had to find new ways to make the books look good for shareholders, so they cut jobs, rebranded layoffs as efficiency improvements, and quietly passed their savings up the chain. Then they raised the consumer prices and blamed it all on what? That's right, you guessed it. Tariffs and supply chain issues, inflation. And the beauty of it, from their point of view, is they never have to mention the real reason their profits keep climbing is because they stopped paying people. Entire department's gone. The remaining team members told, work smarter, not harder. And guess what helps them do it? Yep, AI. Now, speaking from my own experience, back when I was knee-deep in the production world, I'll admit, I had my moments of frustration and maybe a hint of jealousy toward the office crowd. I relied on them, general managers, project managers, sales reps, and half the time, it felt like they did not care. The information always trickled down through 5 pairs of hands, each one tweaking it a little bit, to make their own job easier. And in the B2B world, you've got layers upon layers. I mean, there would be so many hands in these jobs that didn't give a fuck. It was beyond frustrating. Suddenly, the boots on the ground are 10 steps removed from the people making the decisions. A system bred inefficiency, frustration, and just distraught. A perfect example of trimming the fat where it counts. Look at Aldi. I've mentioned them before. They realized a lot of positions other retailers filled just aren't necessary. No baggers, no cart attendants, minimal staffing, but everything still runs. It's lean, effective. That same mentality is what AI brings to the corporate world. Maybe not every job needs to exist. Maybe software can handle certain repetitive tasks faster and more accurately. I'm kind of all for it. I know it's going to piss some people off. Those are jobs. But I say that with a big, giant if. Okay, I'm all for it if these companies actually used AI savings to invest back where it matters, to the front lines. I'd be all for it. Eliminate unnecessary redundancy in the office. Streamline the data flow. Sure, okay? But then take those millions saved and reinvest them into the people who physically make the product, the people on the front lines that actually provide the service. Flip the burger, plunge the toilet, the essential workers. Pay them the wage they deserve. I'm all for it. If we pay them an actual living wage. Yes, eliminate the office jobs then. I'll repeat it one more time. Pay them the real wages that reflect their importance. But, office guys, office people pissed off at me. Hold on, but. We all know that's not going to happen. History has shown time and time again, it's not going to happen. We know shareholders will not allow this. The legal system protects shareholder interests above all else, just like the Dodge Brothers case spelled out a century ago. The company isn't a philanthropy organization, remember? It's a profit machine. So here's what will happen. Those eliminated office wages will show up on the quarterly report as increased profits. The stock value will climb. Executives will cheer, hooray! And the cycle continues. Meanwhile, communities suffer. Compassion and empathy erode. Everyone's chasing easy work, high pay, and fewer people are proud of what they fucking create. And that's the heart of what bothers me. Because for this version of the system to succeed, someone has to lose. A big percentage of our brothers and sisters have to be poor, tired, and desperate enough to keep it running. That's the trade-off we've accepted. And until we face that truth, until we decide that contribution and care for our communities matter more than stock prices, the separation between us will only keep growing. Listen, friends, I want nothing more than to move beyond this chapter we've been stuck in, for all of us, but especially for my kids. Selfish of me, I know, but as a parent of two teenagers, a 16-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter, I find myself completely stumped about what to tell them, what trade, what career, what future they should aim for. Of course, I want them to go to college, but for what? Because that old playbook, go to college, get a good job, climb the ladder, that's the strategy that's backfired for an entire generation of millennials and Gen Zers. Our parents and teachers meant well when they pushed that message. They wanted stability for us. But that advice catered to a system that only works because somebody else does the shitty job. Somebody has to do the dirty work, right? I've always fucking hated that word. Somebody. Somebody will climb out on the wire. Somebody will defuse the bomb. Somebody will flip the burgers. Nobody ever seems to define who somebody is, but we all know who it ends up being. The people whose value the system depends on barely acknowledges. That's how our version of capitalism survives. It needs a losing class. College was supposed to keep you out of it. Get a business degree, go into finance, earn your master's. And a lot of people did exactly that. And now, many of them are struggling just like the burger flippers they were told they'd rise above. Because the only people the system really rewards are the ones willing to be ruthless. The deal makers, the liars, the ladder climbers who treat empathy like a liability. And that's who ends up surviving at the top. Tell me that doesn't sound like the fucking Twilight Zone. Meanwhile, the true essential workers, the people doing the jobs we can't live without, are still fighting to make ends meet. Their wages still don't reflect their worth. But as long as the stock market, sports betting, and profit-driven games of chance define our success, the value of service, of actual work, keeps disappearing. I think it's time we revisit our morals, show some compassion for the class below us, whatever below us even fucking means anymore. Why can't everyone have a slice of fucking pie? It shouldn't be radical to think everyone deserves a fair shot. So here's my challenge. Take a look in the mirror. Don't be afraid to get your hands a little dirty. Contribute to something you care about, because none of us are to blame for the broken rules we were taught. But it's on us to realize the game is rigged. It's not fair, and it won't fix itself. Should we have to pay for the necessities for life? Even the basics: land, water, food, air. I don't think so. It's time to reflect, to reimagine what success means, and to demand better. I know that will be hard for some to hear. Many of you may be saying, "Speak for yourself, pal. I'm not going to be left behind eating the dust of the successful." Well, the middle class no longer exists. I'm not sure you realize that. We're all eating dust. I truly hope someday the majority of us peasants at the bottom will wake up and realize that. There's way more of us than them. Thanks for listening, friends. If this episode hit home, share it, follow it, drop a comment. It really helps the algorithm. Until next time, friends, take care of each other. Later.